start, we're just going to read our acknowledgement to country. So we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands of all First Nations peoples of Australia. We pay respect to their elders past and present. We recognise the continuing connection of First Nations peoples to the land, air and waters, and thank them for protecting these lands, waters and ecosystems since time immemorial. Next slide, on to more boring things. So housekeeping, so this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be emailed out next week to all of you who have registered. Please put all your questions in the Q&A and comments in the chat. Sorry, I've got chats coming up. Your product design and technology student books will be sent out upon publication, and there's an email address there if you've got any questions after the event. Thanks, Jill. I'm just wanted to say that I'm honoured to introduce our two presenters today, Jacinta O'Leary and Jill Livett. Jacinta and Jill are both very experienced product design and technologies teachers. I'd be surprised if all of you haven't encountered Jacinta and Jill over the years, and they are passionate advocates of the subject from both a teaching and a learning perspective, demonstrated in 5 editions of this Nelson text, which is truly extraordinary, as well as their work through data and other sort of things that they will do to sort of support this subject. With the release of the new study design, especially one that has undergone such a major revision as this one, Jill and Jacinta have had to spend a lot of time planning, researching, thinking and discussing to work out the best way to approach this new edition. They have worked tirelessly for the past 9 to 10 months, drawing on their deep understanding and passion for this subject to create what we hope you will find is a very rich, engaging and comprehensive resource for both students and teachers. It feels really great, and I'm sure I speak for Jill and Jacinta today, to be at the point where we can begin to show you the fruits of this labour over all these years, or over these months, sorry. So over to you, Jacinta and Jill.
Oops. Okay, Jacinta, I think you will be doing the first slide, which is talking about what are the major changes of the study design.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, Jill. So this first slide, just a brief summary of the big changes, the new things. And of course, the first thing is that we have a new design process called the double diamond, and Jill will talk about that a little bit. And it's quite different from the circular diagram that we're used to with the clear steps. This is a lot more sort of interlinked and interchanging. And we also have a new design brief structure. We'll discuss in the next slide after that. And with the design thinking areas of critical and creative, we also have speculative thinking. So that's also a new thing that we all have to get our heads around. And we're all now used to the product design factors. There were 9 of them. In this study, there's 8 different factors. They are a little bit similar to the past, but we will need to get used to the new 8 factors, and they're called factors that influence design, and they have slightly new definitions. And throughout the practical work in all the units, there's more emphasis now on modeling and prototyping, so iteration. So I'll hand over to Jill to talk on the double diamond.
So the double diamond design process is a new look to the design process, and it has a different focus in some ways. One of Jacinta's colleagues has talked about the first diamond being the problem space and the second diamond being the solution space, and that's very apt. The first diamond is looking at students really coming to terms with what the issue or the problem or the opportunity is. And the second diamond looks at, well, then how do they solve that or create a solution for that area? It also looks at divergent and convergent thinking. So the shapes of the diamond, for the divergent parts of the double diamond process, it looks at students opening out their thinking, exploring new ideas and expanding their ideas and using creative thinking for those parts of the double diamond. The second part of each diamond is focused on convergent thinking, where students hone in on what are the best solutions, best ideas, and make some decisions. And often that's the space where students use critical thinking mostly. It's a very fluid process, so students are expected to flow from one. That doesn't make it very rigid, that you can only use divergent thinking and convergent thinking in those spaces. Students are expected to flow from one type of thinking to another, depending on their design situation and the flow of their design thinking and design work. In the study design, there are activities for each of the diamonds described on page 13 to 14. So that will be a good reference to think about what are some of the activities students would do to carry out and flow through the double diamond design process. Next, and you'll see in the centre of the double diamond design process is the design brief, and that flows in well to what we need to talk about next, which is the design brief elements. This has changed quite a bit, particularly to include the profile of the end user as part of the design brief. So the design brief has a clear structure where the students firstly identify the need or opportunity, and that summarises the students' research into the design situation. So in that first diamond, a lot of the focus of the students is on researching, on empathising, on finding out a lot more about the design situation and the reasons for the design. So they summarise that in the design brief and they clarify what the need or opportunity is. They then clarify and explain who the end user is through the profile of the end user, and then they identify the intended function. So the first part is the why. Then the third part, the identifying the intended function, is thinking about the what types of areas do they need to think about to create a solution. The project scope covers a lot of the things we've talked about in the past or we've used in the past, the constraints and considerations. And those are a list of things that need to be included or need to be thought about or are required for the design to be successful or the solution to be successful. And they're obviously developed with reference to the factors that influence product design. And they're used then to develop for the students to develop their evaluation criteria. So there's a lot of familiar things that we are very comfortable with, but there are some new aspects of it and new ways of structuring, particularly the design brief. On to you, Jacinta.
So there are some more new cross-study specifications, and the first one that is new for all of us is speculative design thinking. And it's really a way of thinking about the future and thinking about things that we almost don't know about yet. And so the way we've tackled that in the book is to provide a whole lot of questions like what if, like something about climate change. What if there were more floods? What if the weather was so hot that no one could go out? What if the population is full of aging people, that there's a bigger amount of aging people compared to younger people? What if the birth rate, actually that one's not in the book, what if the birth rate continued to fall? But that is something that we could think about. So the way that we've tackled that is to just come up with a lot of questions that students could read and choose a few that might apply to their SAT project and in units 1 and 2 that they might just consider. There's actually a movement called the speculative critical design movement, which is another area that might be of interest, which we've touched on briefly. But that's a very sort of specific thing and possibly more aligned with art. But with the students, we want them to think about possible futures and think about possible solutions to things that don't really exist at the moment, or even just to sort of incorporate some aspect of that. There's also a new area called design specializations, and it's quite a big list of what materials and what products So what material students could work with and what products that they might get their heads around designing and making. And I would say that it's more broad than the previous study. So there's more scope for students to go a little bit sort of outside the normal kind of product thing that they've been doing for the last 10 or 20 years. Not all of them, just some of them. And then the other area is the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, the knowledge, the history and culture of that group. And there's quite a lot about that in the cross-study specifications, but we've tackled that mainly in Unit 2, where it is the outcome 3, and it's a little theory or research task. And we have quite a lot of little stories in there that students can use to help them achieve that outcome. So it's a whole outcome. Students in Unit 2 do need to do that. And the other area is technicy, and you might see that word and think, goodness me, but it's what you're all doing. You're all doing that already. You're thinking creatively, you're working with tools and processes, you're working with materials. So technicy is just a word for everything that we do, all combined in the one sort of, let's say the one process. Okay, Jill, you can go to Units 1 or 2.
Just to add to technicy, there's often 3 parts of technicy that is talked about. That's the environmental aspect, the context that that products are designed for. There's the social aspect, the people side of it, and then there's the processes, the technology, the tools and materials. So they often think about those 3 aspects and how they interlink. And as you can see, that's what we're doing all the time with the processes that we use in product design. We're going to look at Units 1 and 2. So now we're going to look at each of the units in order. I'm going to talk about Units 1 and 2, and Jacinta is going to talk about Units 3 and 4 and all of the complex things that attach to Units 3 and 4 with the SACs and the SAT. Units 1 and 2. Unit 1 is very much about understanding the design fundamentals and giving students a first initial understanding of all of the aspects that they need to know for product design. It also has a focus on teamwork. So the students are expected to work collaboratively with other people, with other students, and develop concepts or work as a team to develop solutions for situations. There are 2 outcomes in Unit 1. The first outcome is very much based on the first designing, empathy, designing, thinking, looking at the problem, and the second section is about creating solutions for the problem. The students are, during this unit, expected to understand or learn about the double diamond design process. So it's their introduction, and particularly next year it will be an introduction for all students to the double diamond design process. And through that, you'll teach the students those fundamental things that they need to know about how they carry out useful research, both at the early stages about the design situation and later useful research for practical solutions for their problem. They also need to learn how to write a design brief and evaluation criteria. They're given an introduction to the drawing skills that they need, but also we will be building in those skills in modelling and prototyping at that stage. They need to learn about production planning and those important production skills that they need for production, and of course, they learn how to evaluate. So they're all of the basic fundamentals the students will need to learn through Unit 1. There's a lot there, and we want to make sure that those students have the opportunity to learn those fundamentals well during that unit. In Unit 2, there are 3 outcomes, and it's organised slightly differently. The first outcome, the main focus of this unit is looking at designing for positive impact. That means learning how to make products that make a difference in people's lives. And it may not just be people, it may be non-humans. So it could be animals and So students need to think about, well, what does it mean to make a positive, to make a solution that will have a positive impact on someone's life? And they need to think about, well, who needs to have products developed for them that will enhance their lives and increase their well-being. Their idea of, in the study design, it talks about belonging and inclusion and accessibility. So there's, in this textbook, we've got a whole lot of case studies where we've got examples of designers who have developed solutions for students who, for end users, in the effort to make a positive difference to their end users' lives. And that first outcome is looking at those case studies and doing some research about how we can have positive impact on people's lives. The second outcome is very much the design process that students need to go through using the double diamond design process for them to identify and then create a solution that will have a positive impact on someone. So they will choose an area where they feel they can make a positive impact and then go through the design process to create a solution for that situation. Then the third outcome, as Jacinta has talked about, is focused on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and looking at cultural influences on design. The idea is that students look at how culture does influence both the design of products, but also how people choose products and the choices they make. And they need to think about how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander traditions and cultures have influenced the design of products in the past, but also have a continuing influence on the design of products now. So again, in the textbook, we're organising case studies where you can find out more about the influences and from Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people about the decisions they make and the things that influence their decisions that are based on their traditions and history and culture. The students are also expected to think about their own culture and explore how that affects their design decisions as well. So there are the three outcomes. The 2, 1 and 3 are very much research outcomes that look at case studies. And then the second one is the major design process outcome where students apply some of those thinkings about making positive impact to a practical situation where they can make a positive difference. Okay, we'll move on to units 3 and 4.
Okay, so units 3 and 4, they're structured a little bit differently to our current study. And in unit 3, the focus, I've put there, the focus is on ethical product design. And that is mostly related to the SAT because the first, I call it the first SAC, it's outcome 1. And it's the only SAC for unit 3. It's now 10% of the score for the year, and the other SAC is in unit 4, which makes the 2 SACs worth 20%. But the one SAC is a little bit about ethical product design, but it's a lot about, technologies, scales of manufacturing, sustainability strategies, a lot of the things that we've already taught, and a few new things such as the 6 R's, the triple bottom line. There's also areas about new and alternative materials, such as materials made from mycelium, the roots of the fungus that are used to create new materials, vegan leather instead of real leather, bamboo instead of hardwood. These are some of the things listed in the key skills and the key knowledge. But a lot of what is covered there is material that you will be familiar with. We also have, with the new and emerging technologies, we also have we have AI, artificial intelligence in manufacturing. And what's the other new thing? I can't remember. It's in the study design. And so then the other 2 areas of study belong to the SAT. So the outcome 2 is pretty much working in that first diamond, as Jill said. It's what's called the problem space. The students do a little bit more research before they actually define what they're going to do in their design brief, and they do brainstorming. They really kind of look into what they will do before they create the design brief, which pretty much comes at the end of outcome 2. And then outcome 3 is where they can do more research for inspiration, but they also start doing their drawings, which I should have said earlier. It's another new piece of terminology. It says graphic product concepts, which means the drawn concepts. So the visualizations, the design options, and the working drawings. So they may or may not do working drawings in that area of study, but it's in that area of study. But here they're starting to really kind of think divergently, come up with lots of ideas, and then think about narrowing them down. So in Unit 4, we only have 2 areas of study, and one of those is a SAC, and that SAC is it's also about analysing and evaluating commercial products. But the difference is with this study is that SAC includes the evaluation of the student's SAT product. So in some ways, I was thinking that to do that SAC, to complete that SAC, you have to wait for the students to finish their SAT and their product. And I know that for myself, that's always such a rush. So I always try to get that SAC done quite early in the piece. I know some people leave it later to help with exam study, but if you wanted to get it done early in the piece, you could start off with it and start evaluating, I suggest, similar products to your SAT product. And then you would add the evaluation of the SAT product in the end, so that the entire SAC is not left near the end. But that's up to you as teachers. That's just something I thought I would say. And it's sort of something that I presented in the book as a possibility. So just to remember that in Unit 4, the first area of study is the last part of the SAT. That's the making and the documenting of the making, the documenting of any modifications, finishing the product. And then the SAC is evaluating products according to the key skills, key knowledge, including the evaluation of the SAT, of the student's SAT product. And the next slide, Jill, shows the breakdown of scores. So we have the SAT being 50% of the score, which is the same as the current study, broken into 3 different areas of study. And each SAC being worth 10%, you'll see them in the yellow, and the exam being 30%. So it's just different in the way the SACs are spread out. And we also have other new terminology for the SAT. The first dot point there says multimodal record of evidence. So multimodal just means really that they can present their evidence in different ways. The one way, they can do it in PowerPoint, they can add a video to explain what they did in production or their experiments. They can do it handwritten. They can have it, you know, different modes of presentation. I myself will be preferring one mode, which will be digital, which will be a sort of combination of different files. And the SACs are different. They're more report-based. If you've looked at the study design and seen the type of tasks that we can do as the SAC, and they'll be more report-based, so they probably won't be done under test conditions. However, we're still waiting on a bit of clarity about that. Okay, Jill, over to you.
Okay. We did think quite a bit while we were reviewing the past textbook and thinking about how we wanted to approach the new textbook, about what were some of the things that we thought would be helpful in the new textbook. And so I think we we felt that we wanted to reorganise the textbook and have the first section of the textbook have a different approach, that we would look at each of the units by themselves, and we go straight into, after an introduction to the double diamond design process, go straight into thinking about Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3 and Unit 4. So the first part of the textbook we go straight into unit by unit information for how to get through all of the outcomes for each of the units. And the last half of the textbook we've called the design fundamentals, where we go through each of the really big major areas, looking at the factors that influence design, looking at different design and development aspects, looking at materials and materials testing. All of those are in sections at the back that students refer to. In each of the units, we will go through each of the features of the units. We have activities that go through. Some of those activities build towards the folio, or they build towards some of the outcome assessment tasks, whereas some of them are much more activities just for a class to go through or to students to go through to help them to understand the content of what we've just discussed in the textbook. So the cross-study specifications, those design fundamentals, as it says there, will be at the back. We've tried to chunk the text a little bit more. There's lots of images. Those of you who've used the textbook in the past will know that we use a lot of student images throughout the text, and there are new uses of infographics, and we'll show you some examples of those in a moment to try and get students engaged in the content, and also, as it says there, to support some of our less confident readers. There are also links to MindTap throughout, and we'll be having Caroline talking about MindTap a little bit more at the end. MindTap is the online resources that you'll have access to, particularly if you are using an ebook. There will be direct links to those online resources and activities throughout the textbook. So the table of contents, that gives you a bit of an idea of how it's structured now, where we go through all of the units and then we have the fundamentals at the end. And you can see that the SAT outcomes and SAC outcomes are fairly clearly identified.
Just to say something there, when Jill talked about MindTap, so with this edition, we're not having a workbook like the current edition. There's the textbook and the workbook. Everything that's useful from the workbook that we've updated will be going online on MindTap in different formats and different files.
So you won't lose it. It will still be there, but it will just be in a different form. This page here shows you the unit outlines, and for each of the unit outlines we look at, well, what's the focus of each of the units. We give you a unit planner that gives you an overall view of how you might break up each of the content areas for the unit into weeks or segments, and also gives you an overview of the assessment for each of those units. Jacinta, would you like to talk about the unit openers, the outcome openers?
So just to repeat that each outcome has its own chapter, basically. So for example, we start with Unit 1. The first chapter is Outcome 1, Chapter 2 is Outcome 2, and so on. So with this particular one, we're up to Chapter 2. So that would be Outcome 2. You probably can't see the little font there, but it's Outcome 2 of Unit 1. So it explains what's in that chapter and what's related to that outcome, which should help you as teachers get an idea of what students need to like in Units 1 and 2, what they need to do to gain an S or a pass for that outcome, because as you know, we have to decide whether students get an S or an N for each outcome. And so on the front page, there's the key skills, the key knowledge of that outcome. There's a little infographic to sort of try and give an idea of what's included. And that MindTap, the dark blue box there, that one, we're still working on this and editing it, but the little MindTap box will show you what's available to use as sort of worksheets or activities online.
We're also going to be having a lot of the case studies that we have had in the previous textbook online in MindTap as well. So those case studies will be still accessible to you. And there are a series of web links that are also will be available in the ebook. Some of them will be direct links, but in the textbook, you'll need to go through to MindTap to get those links. This slide just gives you an idea of the different sorts of activities that you might see throughout the textbook. The fact that we will sprinkle and make sure that the text is broken up with active things that the students can do right the way through, folio activities, just general class activities, and production activities. There will also be things like research activities that will be relevant to different outcomes. Throughout the textbook, we use some great examples of student work. Jacinta's had access to some really good folios, particularly being having online access to her folios, and she's got fabulous examples. I've got some as well, of student work in different forms. Obviously in wood, metal, textiles and plastics areas. So we've tried to capture some of the new areas of the study design in the ways that student examples to give.
Jill, I have to interrupt because they're not all my students. I've sort of put the call out to a few people, and I've got some thank you to all the people, if you're here, who have handed on some amazing student work. So they're not all my students, just so you know.
It's always exciting to see students work, and I think it's a really good guide for students too, to know that a lot of the work in the textbook is done by other students. So that's always a key feature that we like to make sure students are aware of. And we have case studies throughout the textbook, and there's quite a lot of new case studies, particularly for those areas that we haven't covered in the past. So looking at Unit 2, when we're looking at designing products for positive impact, we've really looked for case studies of products that would stir students to think about how we can make a difference to other people, how we can look at people in need and think about how we can create products that are not just consumer products, but products that make a real difference to other people. And also there's the range of Indigenous case studies that are often difficult to find information about. So we're hoping that we can support those aspects that are new to the study design through the case studies. Is there anything else about this page, Jacinta, that we need to?
Just to say that the web links are where they'll sort of give detail of where the information is on MindTap.
Yeah, so that little icon with the yellow bubble with the blue almost windmill is the web links icon. And as I said, in the ebook, those are live links directly to the MindTap resources. We also have other types of indicators throughout the textbook for things that we would like students to consider, or it might be something that that they need to be concerned about when they're doing their work. So things to take note as they're going through the design process or going through specific parts of their study. Jacinta, would you like to? So
wherever possible, we've got some really great visual methods of presenting text, sort of some infographics and some kind of coloured boxes. And there has been studies done showing that students using a textbook do have good memory recall. And part of that is remembering where they saw something on a page, like where they saw something on the left and it was blue, or over in the other corner was orange. And apparently that does help with recall. So, I mean, they still have to be directed to these sort of diagrams or infographics, because students just look at it and it's a bit of a blur. So it's almost like with the with something like this, you'd have to get them to say, well, what's the orange section telling us, and what is moisture content, and which materials does that relate to? So you would still have to use that and get them thinking and really sort of taking that into what they call the back brain, so that they get some understanding rather than a sort of shallow image there. But some of them are really colourful and happy looking, I think, and we've got them sprinkled throughout the text, and that's just an example of one with resistant materials. Thanks, Jill.
The next section is talking about what what hopefully will be able to support the students learning through MindTap. So this is the online resources that students will be able to use. And I think Caroline's going to come in and talk about those. Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks, Jill. You've actually stolen most of my thunder, actually, for a lot of this, but which is great, because Nelson MindTap is really designed to be integrated throughout. So you would have used NelsonNet in the past. So this is a new platform that has a lot more, for want of a better term, guts to it, I guess, and hopefully you'll find it all to be really well integrated with the way you teach. Just to correct Jill and Jacinta, just on one point though, you won't have live links from the ebook into these resources, but it is all integrated, so you will find it quite seamless. Hopefully the resources are very clearly for each chapter, and for each page you'll be able to find quite clearly once you're on the platform. So although you won't be clicking on that icon as such, the icons will go through the whole book, and you will see underneath them, they'll tell you that there's a web link, or there's a worksheet related to this, and various other things that will prompt anyone using the print to know that there are resources available. But if you're using the ebook on the platform, you'll be able to see those resources come up in your learning sort of path that's been designed for you. So Nelson MindTap is, as it says here, an online course delivery platform, and it has an e-text version of the student book. It's customizable learning path for teachers, and it also has the ability for you to assign specific work to students. So it is quite a difference to NelsonNet in that sort of sense, and hopefully a really powerful and fantastic resource. So this is just giving a little snapshot. We've had lots of questions through the sales team already about the workbook, and as Jill was saying before, we don't want to lose what was a really amazing resource, so that you won't lose that. It is going to be available to you. For the worksheets will be downloadable. There are end of chapter quizzes, which is fantastic, and as a teacher you'll be able to push those out to your students and identify, I guess, where there might be some gaps, or where you need to sort of loop back and check in. And I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory. There'll be teaching plans, templates, so a lot of the design, there'll be a design brief template, for example, and Jill and Jacinta at the moment working on what they think will be the most useful sort of templates that you can use, making sure that they're adaptable, either as Word or PowerPoint slides. Yeah, I think that's probably it from me in terms of Nelson MindTap. So over to Anne-Marie, who's our sales rep, who will talk to you a little bit about the pricing and availability.
Good evening, everyone. I know it's getting to that time of the evening and you'll be keen to get to the Q&A, so I will be really brief. So the new student book will be available in December 2023, and it's currently tracking for early December, which is really terrific. Rest assured, we will be supporting you with everything you need for Head Start and planning, from page proofs to worksheets and teacher advice. So as soon as you confirm your adoption, you can reach out to your learning consultant and we will support you from there. The pricing options available are for the student book, print and digital with Nelson MindTap, $83.95. or Nelson MindTap digital only, $49.95. Next slide, please, Jill. And for any questions, queries, even later today, tomorrow, a question comes up, please feel free to reach out to your learning consultant. There's myself, Emery Mosley, Jill Lim, and Kerry Thomas, and we are here to support you with anything you need. If you've missed the sample chapter, please just simply send an email and we'll forward the sample chapter, and we will be sharing full page proofs with you soon. Thank you so much. Susanna, over to you.
I've just popped 2 links in the chat for you all. If you want to look at Nelson MindTap for product design and take in more detail, please book an appointment with your learning consultant. They can take you through the platform and its functionality. I know sometimes over Zoom and webinars, it can be a little bit difficult to see what that's going to look like in practice. And then I've also popped in a sample request link. So once page proofs are available, please fill in that form, and then your learning consultant will get some page proofs to you so you can review this new edition in a little bit more detail if you wish. We don't have any questions in the Q&A or the chat that I can see. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in now while Jacinta and Jill.
Yeah, I just saw one earlier by Craig. I don't know if you're still there, Craig, but I'm not quite sure. I missed it. Not quite sure what you were referring to when you said, is that still presented in the folio? So if you wanted to, can he turn his mic on, or does he need to? So if you're still there, Craig.
Let me check the participants.
It may have been about the multimodal proof of evidence of proof of evidence.
So Craig, is that?
Jill, you got me there?
Yep, we got you.
No, it was just relating to the unit 4 SAT for the product evaluation. Is that still part of the folio?
That's a good question, and it is actually something that I can't answer yet. It's the key knowledge and the key skill is in the SAC, but until the assessment criteria come out, it can't really be. I don't know. Yeah, we can't answer that. Jill, do you think? I don't think.
That's one of the things that there are some areas that are obviously not defined yet because the SAT criteria hasn't been released, and that won't be released until the end of January next year, ready for teaching. And so some of those scope of tasks for the SAT we won't have real clarity about until we get to that stage yet. So we've tried to work out from the study design how we think you'll need to format it, but there are some of those little areas that we don't quite know yet. Would you agree with that, Jacinta? Yeah. The other thing that you will need to think about next year is they will probably publish through the VCE sample exam questions or a sample exam. So it's difficult for us to give you guidance about whether there will be major changes to the exam or whether it's going to be structured as it is. And one of the really good things about the MindTap is that we can update things. And so when we find out that information, we can update that on MindTap. We won't be able to update the textbook, but we will be able to update some of the MindTap resources so that they reflect our further knowledge once the SAT criteria are released and also the exam information is released.
And also the SAC performance descriptors. I'm just going to address the 2 questions from Dean and Alison. So Dean, to confirm, no, that the current year 11 will continue. No, they will not continue with the current study design. They will be using the new study design for next year. And then Alison asked, well, what textbook do we suggest for the current year 11s for next year, seeing as they'd only have it for 1 year? I don't know, perhaps a class set, or perhaps you just get to know the study design well enough yourself.
I would have advised they don't use the current current textbook, because there are some significant things that will be particularly in the exam. So it might be that for the transition year, they just get the ebook, so it's not quite as expensive as well.
And the other thing is that we're hoping, so Dean, what we're hoping, we're still working on them, is a little Head Start program that we thought would be really useful this year for the current year 11s to start getting them thinking about the double diamond and a lot of the things that will come up. So Jill and I are still working on a list of things that you could cover, and also some activities to help cover them. We don't know when that will be ready.
There's a question from Pierre Barnes about access to the ebook for students when they sell their hard copy text on the secondhand market. What happens to access to the ebook? Can someone else answer that question, perhaps?
Anne-Marie? Yeah.
I was going to say, Anne-Marie or Caroline, will you be able to tackle that one? Essentially, what Pierre's asking, for students who sell their hard copy of the textbook, will they automatically have access to the ebook, or what happens to their ebook access, I should say?
They'll need to purchase digital Nelson MindTap access. So to have the digital access.
In the past, they've had codes that they've been able to use as access, and there are no codes for secondhand users.
I'd just like to address a question there by Phil. Phil says, as a summary in terms of practical work, Unit 1 and 2 students in a team or theme, students build a prototype model to improve the life of a human or animal. Yes, Unit 1, the outcomes are about teamwork, but not in Unit 2. And build up prototype, they can build many prototypes, models, prototypes, checking things. They could be for parts of the product. They can also, which is interesting because it says it can be a virtual prototype. So any students who are familiar with CAD, any CAD, can actually look at a virtual prototype. But of course, you'd want them to print that out, put it in their folio. Any paper models or cardboard models, prototypes should be photographed to put in as evidence. And then Phil asks, Unit 3 and 4, one build after research in Unit 3 and build in Unit 4. No, there won't be any building in Unit 3, any making. Remember,
unless it's prototype making or model making.
Yeah, they might start on some skills, but basically Unit 3, the first outcome is doing research around what they will do and then creating a design brief at the end of that. So some research, both quantitative, qualitative, on the end user and the need. And then outcome 3 is basically the designing using graphical product concepts, which is the drawing, and then moving on to the modeling. So Unit 4, outcome 1 is just the making. Is that correct, Jill?
Yeah, I think there is a real focus in the new study design that students work through not just drawn versions of their ideas, but they work through physical or virtual modelling, and iterative design is very much a focus that students improve on their design. They don't just have their first design and make that. They really need to work on their design to improve it to become the best possible design. So you've got to factor that into the timeline that you have to give the students the opportunity to explore both physical and drawn ideas.
So it's still only one project for Units 3, 4.
But it's versions of that project that they gradually improve. Now, there was a question from Pierre Barnes wanting to go back to the slide with the different weeks. I think that's that slide there. So we do have that in the textbook where it's both Jacinta and I's idea about how you might break it up. Of course, teachers are able to change order and change the time that you use for each of those stages, but it's just how we think you can fit it into the space that you've got in your semesters.
And there's a comment from Chris saying about students who have purchased the text and the workbook in 2023. I mean, I'm sorry, but every study, this is not, we don't create the study designs, but every study design has years on the cover. So the current study has on the front 2018 to 2023, and the new study 2024 to 2028. So it's just a reminder that in 2028, which would be the last year, that you careful about what you ask the students to purchase. But that's very clearly on the front of the study design, what years it's for, and then you would know what's coming up in terms of study designs.
And I think there's just one other question from Hazel, which says, what is the specific focus for Unit 1 other than teamwork and the new double diamond process? And with Unit 2, they do research about positive impacts, generate and make a product, and then do another research task. Is that correct?
That's pretty close. The main focus, Unit 1 is called Design Practices. So it's looking at giving students the fundamentals about design practice and working with the team. So there's no particular focus for the products that they make. You might want to look at the different design specializations and perhaps use some of those as the focus, the different fields of design, and think about that. And there's also scope for teachers to set a particular area that you want your students to work on. So there's some flexibility about how you deliver that. And Unit 2 is very much about learning about how other designers make a positive impact through their design of the products that they develop, getting the students to do the same process about thinking about how they can make positive impact, and then designing and iterating and coming up with prototypes and a final design and then evaluating whether their product has made a positive impact, and then looking at how culture influences design. So they're the 3 outcomes in Unit 2. Yeah.
And Jill Ellison's got a comment about Unit 2 as well. And it does seem, Ellison, that outcomes 1 and 3 are intensive, but the way Jill's developed a timeline there is to put outcome 3, the cultural one, sort of in 2 or 3 weeks, because outcome 2 is actually where you almost do everything. So you need to allow quite a lot of time for outcome 2 in Unit 2.
So outcome 1 is just the initial research into the problem. Outcome 1 is just that initial research. So that also is probably not a significant time that you would spend on it, even though it's a fairly significant concepts for the students to learn.
And there's just one final question from Pierre that says, have you only allowed 1 week for production there in Unit 1 for outcome 2?
No, we actually, the top of that heading is weeks 1 to weeks such and such to such and such. So there's a number of weeks that we've suggested for production. We just didn't want to break it up into lots of squares. So it's just for ease of laying out on the page.
And I think there's another question, which is great. How will let me actually open it. So how would the aspects of the modelling with textiles look against card, paper, foam modelling? That's in the chat if I have not.
So Martin, yes, so he says, how will the iterative aspects of modelling? So the most obvious thing for textiles is if it's clothing, is a toile, which is spelt T-O-I-L-E. Some people think it's toile, but it's toile, French. And that would be sort of probably the final modelling, prototyping. But up until then, students could do sample pockets, sample straps, sample all sorts of things. I mean, they could actually do them in Illustrator as well. I'm not quite sure, because remember, it can be virtual. But yeah,
they could also get them to make little scale models of the clothing with different fabrics, just to see how the visuals look, or how the fabric deals with the shape, looking at silhouettes and shapes and that sort of thing, if you're looking at clothing. But there are other ways of doing it for other types of products.
We have lots of suggestions in the book about how students could do it for all sorts of materials, but yeah, cutting up paper or making little miniature paper models, that's all okay too. Yeah, that's interesting what Alison says about getting students to move away from the garment, because a lot of students call the subject fashion, which is a bit of a shock when they come to the exam. So remind them that it is product design, because it's not going to be about fashion, so to speak. And it's good to push students into doing different things. That's true.
There's another question from Chris Wilson about being new to PD&T and recommending an eFolio Apple program. I tend to go with really basic thing that everyone uses. We use PowerPoint, and we find that a really useful way of students being able to use a digital version of their folio. But I know a lot of other teachers use other forms of programs. So I think it's
Google Classroom is excellent as well, because you can see the work as the students go. If your school has access to Google Classroom, then Google Slides are fantastic.
And I know
some
schools get the students to create a website that they, a private website that they just put all of their content on, that shows the flow of their design as well, and includes photographs of modelling and all of those sorts of things. So it just depends very much on what you are happy for students to do and what you can cope with very easily in your classrooms and in your school.
And to answer Phil's question, 3D printing for prototyping, absolutely. Certainly for parts, that's an excellent way for students to check things out. And other people are suggesting different apps they use, like Canva and so on. A lot of schools have access to Canva as well. OneNote from Liam. Teams, yes, whatever works, whatever's happening in your school is really the best thing to use. If you're new, I would talk to the BizCom teacher in your school.
Yeah. And you don't want to be spending a lot of time during product design teaching them how to create the folio. You want to focus on the content of the folio. So use things that are very easy and accessible for the students to get in and get their work up if they're doing it digitally for their digital folio.
I don't think there are any other questions. So if you have any final questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. But if there is nothing further, I will stop our presentation tonight. I want to thank all our presenters for speaking, and thank you all for attending. The recording and the slides used in this presentation will be sent out within a week. So by the end of the week, you should have both. And again, those links are in the chat if you'd like to learn more about Nelson MindTap or about the textbook to request a sample. But thank you, everyone, and I hope you guys all have a good rest of your night.